We're going to be looking at some cabooses on trains, that is. That's not this type of show. So, what are the cabooses, you may ask? So, the cabooses are those cars that are at the end of a train. Now, you don't see them very often anymore because they've largely been replaced. However, in the golden age of railways, you would see them quite a bit. So we'll actually take a look at some of them and some pictures of the cabooses that we have here. And also we'll tell you a little bit about one of our most popular programs that we do here. It's been seen on CTV, CBC, many radio stations, and that's our Overnights in the Caboose program. So to give a little background on cabooses, they've been around for about 150 years, and they've gone through a lot of changes. So the caboose had a couple functions, one of which was an office for the conductor and the engineers, and then another one was for a place for them to actually sleep. So much like how we have our overnights in the caboose, they'd be able to sleep and rest in one. Originally, each car had their own caboose, so each team of engineers and conductor would have their own. But then later on, it became as each section had multiple of them because it was just more efficient just to switch them out as opposed to each person having their own. Each group having their own. So the caboose also carried a brakeman and you had a flagman. So in the days before automatic air brakes, what would happen is the engineer signaled the caboose with his whistle that he was going to slow down or stop. Then the brakeman would climb out, make his way forward. He'd twist the brake wheels atop of the cars. And then another brakeman who was riding the engine would work his way toward the rear. Once the train was finally stopped, the flagman would get off the caboose and they'd walk back with lanterns, flags, and other warning devices to stop any trains that were coming near. And then once underway, the trainmen would sit in the cupola and they'd watch for smoke. Why would they watch for smoke? Well, see, originally, and for a long time actually, up until really the 70s, the wheels or trucks of the cars were in a somewhat interesting manner. So we just put it up on screen here. So you'll see where it says the journal box. So the journal box is also called the hot box or the fire box. The reason behind that is if you look at the wheels, if you look at the axles, it's just steel. So inside of that journal box, they would put sometimes cotton or sand, and it would be heavily oiled and lubricated. This was to decrease friction between the axle and the firebox. The problem was if this oil had run out, or pretty much that's it. If the oil had ran out, the lubrication's gone, then it would cause sparks, and those sparks would start a fire, and then it would light fire to the car that it was underneath. And once one car goes on fire, then the whole train can start on fire, which generally is not a good thing, especially if they're wooden cars which catch fire, or there's sometimes, especially if there was livestock in there, you wouldn't want that. That'd be a bad thing. Anything flammable. Generally, fire is not good, and especially on train, the fire isn't good. So what they would do is they would sit up top in the cupola, which is that kind of raised section that's at the back or in the middle or front, but normally it's in the back or the middle. And from there, they'd be able to see the farthest forward, and they would also be able to, they'd be able to see the farthest forward, and they'd be able to see both sides of the train to look at both wheels. So it was originally, the first cupola was developed by an American, and he was an American engineer. His name was T.B. Watson. He worked on he was an engineer. He was a freight conductor, and he was on the Chicago and Northwestern Railway in 1898. I actually have a quote from him here. It says, during the 60s, and this was, of course, the 1860s because, a long time ago, During the 60s, I was a conductor on the C&NW, that's the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. One day in the summer of 1863, I received orders to give my caboose to the conductor of a construction train and take an empty boxcar to use a caboose. This car happened to have a hole in the roof about 2 feet square. I stacked the lamp and toolboxes under the perforation end and sat with my head and shoulders above the roof. Later, I suggested putting a box around the hole with glass in it so I could have a pilot house to sit in and watch the train. So that's how the cupola got started. It was this fella, T.B. Watson. He was using just a cutout of the boxcar, and then he was given the idea to put a encasing around it. So that's the cupola that you actually see jutting out of most engines now. Not engines, of cabooses. So if you see in this picture here, you see that black, it's right above the CN logo. That would be the cupola. Last Thursday, we actually showed a video of what the cupola looks like, cupola, or however you want to say it, tomato. And we showed what it would look like if you were in the engine, if you were in the cupola and looking forward. So that was last Thursday. If you want to check that out, actually, it's on YouTube, Dailymotion, everything that this is on as well. So I mentioned how they were used. I said that this is the first reason, and the second reason is the home away from home. So it was common for railroads, to assign a caboose to each conductor for his own exclusive use. These conductors, they took a lot of pride in their cars, and they gave many nicknames. Things like Crummy, Doghouse, Bonebreaker, and then some that I don't think I can repeat or we'd get kicked off of YouTube. And a lot of the men decorated their car interiors with curtains, family pictures. We have a photo here, and this is from the 1920s, but it's a little blurry due to the fact that it's so old. And this is, by the way, courtesy of up.com. Their heritage history cabooses. So we need to thank them, credit them. So as you can see, they decorated the inside. They have little homey touches, curtains, all that kind of stuff. And the caboose served as essentially a home away from home for these men. For the most part, they were fairly basic. And then in the 1970s, they had gotten a little more sleek, a little more fancy. And I'll show you what one of our 1970 cabooses looks like. So they had these sleeker windows and shatterproof glass. These automatic oil heaters, they could keep it actually warm during the winter. They didn't have to shovel coal like they used to. They had electric lights, telephone, radio, and even special crew seats. And these ones were $18,000 and vastly different than the ones that came before. So I mentioned a little bit about our overnights on the caboose. Our overnights on the caboose is actually a program that we run. It's been fairly popular. We've done it for about 3 years now. The first year, it wasn't necessarily the most popular. We still had a number of bookings, but we were somewhat cautious about it. The second year, so last year, we decided to put it on Airbnb. Airbnb is, of course, this rental service. You can rent out little apartments or whatnot when you go to a different town or even in your own town. So we rented it out on Airbnb, and it ended up being a smash hit. Everybody loved it. So then we started it again this year for 2020, and unfortunately, the whole COVID thing happened. So we've had to take some extra measures. So last year, we had them rented out every day of the week. And that was literally, we usually had them rented out every day of the week. We had many, many visitors. But with COVID, we had to change things around, so we do weekend stays. Now, the weekend stays, you can book one caboose. Now, granted, they have to be within your social bubble, so you can't just have anyone on board with you. And also, you have an individual washroom. as opposed to the washrooms that were in the station. Well, the washroom is still in the station, but you have one specifically assigned to you in your caboose. Also, with this year, we're not able to offer breakfast because of the food handling rules with COVID. Now, will that change? We're hoping it will. Hopefully 2021, if everything kind of blows over and we can get back to normal, we'll be offering food again. 2020, unable to. And also with COVID, we've had to limit use of our kitchen, so you're not able to use the kitchen for cooking your own food. Now, you are still allowed food. We have a beautiful breezeway that you can sit in, as well as sit in the caboose itself. I'll admit, if you look at the cupola, as we would have seen last week with the ride, it ended up being a beautiful view, and I highly recommend sitting in it during sunset. The sunset is just beautiful. You can see it, and you can see quite a far distance with it. So some of our stay information. They're available weekends, July to October. Now you're not going to be able to book any in July, considering that it's August 11th. But our September and October, they're pretty much still free to book. Or I shouldn't say that. There's free time slots. It's not free. You do have to pay for it. We're not that kind of operation. Check-in time is between 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. and check-out time is 10 a.m. the next morning. We'll provide you with fresh linens and towels. You don't need to bring your own pillow sheets or anything. We'll get them to you here, and we'll give you towels as well. The reason we give you towels is because in our bathrooms, we have shower facilities. So you can actually have a shower in the morning if that's your thing. You can have a shower at night if you want to. We won't judge. I mean, I sort of will, but that's not my place. But it kind of is. So we also have Wi-Fi access that you can get from inside your caboose. And of course, there's power in your caboose, and you can use that for, well, whatever you use it for. Charge your phone. If you have a CPAP machine, you can just plug that in, and you're all good to go. We actually have two cabooses. The first one is our steel caboose, 1970. This picture that I pulled up, these are two of our former summer staff students. That's Robin and Jane. Robin's the one on the right, Jane's the one on the left. And that's sort of the entrance to the caboose. This is the door to the caboose, looking on from the other side. This one's a bit longer. It was built in 1972, and it was used up until the end of the caboose's run. And I should have mentioned that, actually, now that I said that out loud. So the reason you don't see cabooses anymore is because the two reasons I talked about, those ended up becoming obsolete. See, as a home for the caboose, as a home for the engineers and the conductors, those were replaced by bunkhouses, which could be run either by the railway themselves or someone else, or they could rent out rooms, as in hotel rooms for the conductors and engineers. And that's actually what they do now. Via Rail in Canada, I'm not sure about places in the States or Europe, but Via Rail in Canada usually has their own. They do contracts with hotels, in which case they're able to get deals on them and be able to put their people up in the night there. And then you might be thinking, well, what about the wheels? Well, the wheels we don't use the hot boxes anymore. I mean, we do at our station because our cabooses and the trains that we pull still use hot boxes. But on commercial railways, they don't use hot boxes anymore. What they do is they use ball bearings. So ball bearings, they don't require that constant watching because they don't start on fire. They don't spark. You don't need to lubricate them. You only need to inspect them once every 5 years. So it sort of eliminates the need for the cupula and the need to watch them. And then combine that with the better virtualization of different trains. You can hear them coming. There's radio to communicate. The use of the caboose has unfortunately fallen out of favor. That's why you don't see them anymore. And this is what the inside of the cupula actually looks like. This is the top. This is our 1972 one. This is our steel one. You can see it here. It has the yellow railings around it and a nice chair for them to sit in. They also, in there, they had a nice place to sleep. So there's actually 3 futons in there that fold into beds. You can see the third one actually sort of in the back. and you'll see more of it actually in a couple seconds when I show you the picture back there. But you can see they have two here, two beds. It can fit 3 beds. Now we put better mattresses, more modern mattresses on them, so they're a bit more comfy than they used to be. But the premise stayed the same. They would have their mattress on the futon, and then they'd be able to sleep on that. The steel one, it was a bit newer, so it had a more modern kitchen. So here we have a refrigerator. Now we don't keep the refrigerator running because though there is power, there's not necessarily really a need for it. Now there is a bottle of Coca-Cola in there that we don't know who it belongs to. We would like to know if that Coca-Cola bottle that was in our 1972 Caboose belongs to you. Please let us know. The Caboose number is CN Canadian National 79274. If you left your Coca-Cola bottle in there, contact us and we will try and get it back to you. But for now, we'll keep it in there. So they had a refrigerator, and you can also see they had a hot plate in there where they'd be able to heat up whatever they were making, and a nice little bread box. It had a water tank, so they'd be able to run water through there. You can sort of see the sink. So they had a nice little, excuse me. I do not know why I just yawned. I just drank Orange Crush, so there's no reason I should be yawning. In this picture, you can see it a little better. You can see the sink there. In that picture, actually, you know what? I'll put this picture up. It's picture titled 4, even though it's not the 4th picture that we're using. And this is sort of the office. You can see they have a desk. It's right by that yellow door, and the conductor would be able to perform his duties, whatever he needed to do, usually writing things out, looking at people you get tickets from. I just passed a note. Oh, I'm sorry. I actually messed it up. The steel one wasn't built in 1972. It was used in the 70s. It was built in 67. I get my dates mixed up from time to time. Thank you, Lisa. She's just off camera. But I'm off camera too, so it doesn't matter. And she just let me too. Sorry, it was built in 1967. It was used in the 70s. I'm not good with dates. And I'm not good with memorizing dates either. So that's the steel caboose. And it's a very nice caboose. It's actually very comfortable to sleep in. And it keeps a good temperature too. During the winter, it's easily heated. And during the winter, it's very coolable. I don't think that's a word, but I'm going to make it a word. And this is the outside of it. So this is how it is on display, but when you're actually at the station, when you're renting out the caboose, it's right beside the station. It's right on the breezeway, so it's an easier way to board. Now we have another caboose that we rent out. It's a Canadian Pacific one, and it's red plywood. Now this one I know all the information on this one. I know that was built in 1945, and this is probably this is my favorite caboose, definitely, and probably one of my favorite cars that we have. So if you look at it, you can see that it's made very differently from the steel caboose. Well, it's made differently because it's made out of a completely different material. It's actually made out of plywood. Hold on a minute. Why would a train car be made out of plywood, especially something as important as a caboose? What about the wheels? What if they start on fire? It's easier wrecked. Well, the reason this was built with plywood instead of steel is because it was built in 1945. For those of you that don't know, which I'm hoping is none of you, because this was a fairly important event in history, 1945 was during the Second World War. It was near the end of it. So during the Second World War, things like wood, food, and steel were rationed during and for a period after World War II. So when Canadian Pacific was building this caboose, there was a couple stipulations. One, they wouldn't get as much steel as they used to. And 2, they had to use it for the war effort. So in this case, what they did is they used the minimum amount of steel. Essentially, they used the trucks, the wheels, out of steel, as well as the bare minimum frame, and the rest was made out of wood. And now the other stipulation that they had to be used for the war effort And this is the reason actually why it's one of my favorite, because my family lived in Europe during the Second World War, and the mean Mr. Mustache was not too kind to them, and the Canadian Army used it for transporting soldiers to and from Halifax. So Halifax was where a large naval base was, a large military base was, and that was where soldiers would be shipped out and brought back in. They would be brought back in, whether they were for wounded or in 1946 when all the soldiers were coming home. Well, 1946, 1947, when the soldiers were coming home, they'd come into Halifax, and then they'd be taken from Halifax to... I'm yawning again. They would take them from Halifax back to wherever they would go. Whether they came from... Our caboose that we have here would go as far as Toronto, but some would go much farther. So that was how this was used during the war effort. And this was used by Canadian Pacific. Now, the inside of it, much like the outside of it, is made out of wood. So it's actually a bit comfier. I'm not going to lie. The bed is a bit sturdier than a futon. This is what the bed looks like. And it has the stretcher right above the bed. Every caboose had to have a stretcher in case of medical emergency. Which hopefully wouldn't happen, but yeah, sometimes it did. So this caboose, because it was older, was a little bit more basic. So it did have it had a heater in it. That heater was coal powered. So they had to have a very, very good chimney, because you wouldn't exactly want the smoke from the coal getting into the place where you were sleeping. Now with the coal stove, not only were you heating the caboose, but you were also could use it as a stove to cook in or to boil things on. So right on top of the stove, we don't have a good picture of it, but what you would do is you would put your kettle on top of the stove, and the kettle would boil, the water would be boiled from the kettle, and you'd be able to use that for tea or a lot of the time coffee, because the boys that were on cabooses were often very heavily worked, so coffee was a very important thing to them. And then ours is a bit fancier. It actually has a spot. You can use it almost like an oven. You can open up the side and put some bread in it, or whatever you want to cook. So that's how we do it on our overnights on the caboose. And I should mention, our orange steel caboose, it can sleep 2 adults or 1 adult and 2 small children, although we often can put a third bed in there, so it can sleep 3 adults. Our red plywood caboose, it sleeps 3 adults or 2 adults and 2 children, and has 3 beds in it. To book these, actually, you can book on Airbnb.ca. I had put in the description of this, on all channels, I had actually put in the link to the Airbnb. Now I put the link into the one that is on the wooden caboose, mainly because that's my favorite, but there's also the steel caboose that you can easily get to once you click that link. So that's pretty much about it when it comes to the cabooses. It's hard to really explain things until you're actually there watching it with us. Now what we will do is I'll actually do, I know I showed it already last week, but I think I'll show it again this week, and that is the ride, the cupola ride. And let me just pull it over actually. It'll just be 1 second. I don't know why it didn't save from our last episode. Okay. Cupola ride. And copying one item from videos to media. We're at 11%, 13%, 14%. You know what? Let's just say we're at a certain percentage. Shouldn't take too long. But the Cubby Library is very interesting, and it's a good view, and you can actually get a good view of what these would look like. Now, in this ride, of course, because it wasn't a long ride, we weren't going as fast as they did, but it was still going a good speed. And now that it's up, let me just pull it up for you, and I hope you enjoy. It's about 12 minutes long. That's what it looks like from the Caboose. I should probably turn my microphone on when I said that. Now the other thing is, I was trying to find those pictures, but of the inside of the wooden Caboose. Unfortunately, the program that I was using to show the pictures of is called Only M. A buddy of mine suggested it for me. It wasn't able to take those pictures files, so I have them open. I'm just gonna pull them down. You'll see my screen for a sec. There you go. This is what they look like. This is the inside of the Caboose. Now this one has 2 beds set up. That bench can be set up as a third one as well. We have 2 different styles of bed. Over here you can see the beautiful desk that the conductor could use to do his paperwork or for writing letters or whatever he needed to do. Now here's another view. This time we have a different bed sheet on it. We actually have a Canadian Pacific bed sheet on it that we have. We don't put those out often, but a lot of the times, well, I shouldn't say we don't put them out often. We do, but not a lot during the summer, just because, I mean, they're fully wool blankets. They get extremely hot. I don't recommend them. Well, I do recommend them, but only in the winter time. Otherwise, you will lose your life privileges. And then here's the cupola of the inside of the wooden Caboose. You can see here it actually does. It is a metal pole that you can climb up to with a little metal staircase. It's a good view and it's good seats up there. I will admit though, it's somewhat, I shouldn't say difficult, but it's somewhat annoying because here's the thing. I'm 6'1". I have size 14 feet. It's not exactly designed for people with big feet. So the ladder can be a little bit of a pain. But it's still a beautiful view. And it's very comfortable actually up there. And that's another place, much like the one in the Steel Caboose, I highly recommend the beautiful view there for the sunset. When you book, because let's be honest, you're going to book. If you're watching this, you will book a overnight in the Caboose. And if you don't, well, you will. So I don't need to threaten you. Which I just realized I probably shouldn't have said live. So we're going to actually wrap it up for today. We're going to land this plane. Or bring the train into the station. I keep wanting to say land this plane because I was watching a guy who always said that. We're bringing this train in the station. So thanks for watching. Of course, visit us again Instagram, rmo.sf, rmo.org, rmo.square.site for our online store. You can get lots of cool stuff there. You can actually get an engineer's hat. And we'll talk a little bit more about the engineers probably in the next coming week. And I'll actually get an interview with an engineer once again in the coming weeks. Check us out on Facebook, RMEO Smiths Falls, patreon.com/RMEO. We put a lot of videos up on how we do our podcast, but also we're going to be putting up some exclusive pictures from our archive. We have thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of pictures spanning from the late 1800s to this year, really, of different artifacts and of different trains. So you want to check that out. Exclusive memberships start at $5 a month. So price of a fancy cup of coffee. Instead of buying something from Starbucks, you can get some cool pictures. So that's it for today.